late because this is about the 30th anniversary of the dissolution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which ended on, well, some people think it was Christmas Day, 1991. There are others who say, no, it was New Year's Eve, 1991. But anyway, it's just over 30 years ago. So the USSR was often known as the Soviet Union. People often date it to the October Revolution, 1917, but really it was proclaimed in December 1922 from the stage of the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow, whereat I saw a ballet, but that's another story. So the Soviet Union was based around Russia. It was Russia and 14 other Union republics, but they weren't all there at the beginning. But most of those: Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Moldova. That only was annexed in 1939, and then in 1940 they annexed Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So I hope that makes up to 16 in all. So the capital city was Moscow, and the official language was Russian. It was really the Russian Empire under a new guise, the head of state was usually an ethnic Russian. There was one Georgian who held it, I think. What was his name? There was an Armenian briefly, and first secretary of the Communist Party, or general secretary of the Communist Party, same title. They changed it from time to time. Was the head honcho, in effect. Although the actual head of state was chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, and that person would be largely unknown to the general viewers. Changed a few times. So the Soviet Union was based on this Marxist-Leninist ideology. It was the first communist state in the world. And the word Soviet really just means council. It comes out of, after the February Revolution 1917, in various cities like St. Petersburg or Petrograd, as it then was, setting up councils in various workplaces, in factories, on railway lines, in coal mines, in restaurants and shops and so forth, and the workers seizing control and them running it and electing a council. And then all these workplaces would elect delegates who'd go to the Soviet for the whole city, so elected councils, and they turned that word into a word for a nationality. So they weren't simply going to call it Russian Empire. There's some people in the Russian Empire who weren't Russian or even remotely close, whose languages were not related to Russian in any wise, whose cultures were not akin to Russian and so forth, and were simply part of the Russian Empire because they'd been subjugated. The Russian Empire did them some good, but it also did them an awful lot of harm. Anyway, so Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was their first head of state. Stalin ruled it for longer than anybody else. So I don't want to talk about the history of it too much, but obviously the major accomplishment of the Soviet Union was winning the Second World War. And the Soviet Union's importance in winning the Second World War is not fully appreciated in Western countries, particularly in the United States. Obviously, there's a lot of self-laudation in Occidental countries. People like to give themselves a pat on the back saying, oh, we won the Second World War. And of course, many Western countries contributed, not the Republic of Ireland. We weren't a republic at the time. But really, is the Soviets paid the blood price. And they'd gone from being a very backward economy in the 1920s to, by the 1980s, being quite a major economy, though all right, a generation behind the US in technology. Nothing like the prowess of a major Western country, having got rid of literacy, having got rid of religious bigotry, having introduced gender equality, some major infrastructure accomplishments. But obviously there were some structural problems. The Soviet Union was obviously viciously oppressive to its own people, and there was massive-scale state terror. One of its founders, Leon Trotsky, even published a book entitled In Defense of Terror. Moreover, they always had their secret police, who sometimes weren't very secret, walking around in their fetching leather garments with banners saying things like, "Long live the Red Terror." And when they said terror, they really meant it. So the Soviet Union certainly executed hundreds of thousands of its people, hundreds of thousands, that's no exaggeration. And millions more died in slave labor camps, millions more died in deliberately created famines when the Soviet government was trying to control every last gram of food. The Holodomor in the early 1930s affected the Ukrainians particularly, or likewise in Kazakhstan, trying to force this itinerant people to pursue sedentary agriculture when the climate and the soil was completely unsuitable for it, and so on. And so Stalin's satanic tyranny is something which the current Russian government is trying to efface and pretend like it wasn't happened, just blandly refer to repression without going into that, militarizing childhood, making these army uniforms in toddler sizes. It's deeply sinister. But anyway, it was a one-party state, and really people had no rights, didn't even have a right to move around your Union Republic. Remember, your Union Republic is like Belarus or Turkmenistan or Armenia or wherever, and have this propisk system, having to get a pass to move various places. No freedom of expression, despite all this being in the constitution. Anti-Soviet agitation, any criticism of the government, even if it's absolutely true, that's anti-Soviet agitation, you can be going to a labor camp. And when they'd had these huge purges in the 1930s, about 50% of people sent to these slave labor camps had no pretense of a trial whatsoever. It was a solely administrative process. Somebody arrested, signed, yeah, he's guilty. But anyway, let's move on to the dissolution. So Mikhail Gorbachev, he became General Secretary of the Communist Party in March 1985, and that was he was clearly in the paramount position, and he was relatively young to hold that office, 54, and he'd been in charge of Soviet agriculture. He'd been a dismal failure, but he recognized the system was badly in need of an overhaul. Plus, they were mired in this intractable Afghan conflict. Sound familiar? Anyway, so he introduced glasnost, which is openness, perestroika, literally restructuring of the economy, introducing small-scale capitalism. People often have their cabbage patch, allowing them to sell some of their produce, and that got more food circulating, because comestible production was always a headache. They struggled to do that. And by the 80s, everybody had enough to eat, but you'd never waste a morsel. And their products were just really unattractive, and they didn't have to be appealing because people had very little choice. Having to wait for hours in queues in the snow very early in the morning to get basic comestibles, just empty shelves. Money wasn't very useful to you because there were almost no products to purchase. So you realise this has got to change. But this openness extended to unbanning other political parties, to releasing political prisoners, of which they still held thousands, to no longer abusing psychiatry and labelling people mentally ill for just being political dissidents. And so other political parties were set up. Some of them were nationalists, wanted independence for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Remember, they'd only been annexed in collusion with Nazi Germany in 1940. So independence movement started up there, the Popular Front in Azerbaijan. People became more aware of their identity. Anyone who campaigned even for real autonomy of the Union Republic, they were going to jail if they did that. That would be seen as extremism. Again, sound familiar? It's just what's happening in Russia today. So in 1989, that 23rd of August, there was a human chain from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia of millions of people holding hands at the precise moment when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, or the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which was Germany green-lighting the Soviet annexation of these democracies. And it's something that the Russian government likes to pretend didn't happen, though Putin apologized for it about 15 years ago, then sort of said it was the right thing to do, and now likes to act like it didn't happen, like this is a Western smear, that the Soviet Union actively assisted the Nazi Germany in being a co-belligerent of Germany against Poland. Anyway, so people were there wanting independence. The Ministry of the Interior troops intervened, and I think it was in Riga, Latvia, where several peaceful protesters were shot dead by them. There being clashes between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and then there was a massacre in Baku, where about 100 unarmed people were shot dead by the Soviet army, not all of whom were Russian. Supposedly some Soviet soldiers were killed. I've heard people say that no Soviet soldiers were killed, certainly no names were released. The government just had to say that as a justificatory argument of having killed all these other people. So the situation was slightly spiraling out of control. And then in August 1991, when Gorbachev was on his customary holiday by the Black Sea, the committee, the State of Emergency Committee, seized office, announced that he was ill, he'd been removed from office, and they were controlling the situation. But that spurred those Baltic republics to declare independence straight away, and the coup just failed. They weren't willing to use mass violence. People did not want to go back to totalitarianism. So the coup collapsed within 3 days. Gorbachev returned. It was mainly because there was a president of each Union Republic, or a head of each Union Republic. It was Boris Yeltsin, who had been a communist, but was really a dissident, an anti-communist, to some extent a Russian nationalist by this stage. And he had stood on the tank and given a truculent speech. He was going to defy these people who were going to drag people back to Stalinism. So he was really the man of the moment, although Gorbachev was president. So Gorbachev you saw September 1991, most of these Union republics declaring independence. And by that autumn, they realized the Soviet Union had virtually disappeared. These countries were setting up their own armies, were establishing their own currencies, trying to set up embassies abroad, didn't really manage to do it for the first few years. So the Commonwealth of Independent States was set up in the 8th of December 1991. That okay, so that's some of the former Soviet republics, as in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, plus a few more. And the leaders of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia agreed that the Soviet Union had simply ceased to exist, and that was the reality. So that's how it was dissolved. There'd been a referendum that was held in December 1991, where 91% of Ukrainians voted that they wanted to secede from the Soviet Union. And because I remember at the time saying, okay, communism will go, but the Soviet Union will remain united, at least Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, and so on. But it wasn't to be. It's surprising so many Ukrainians voted for that, because there are quite a few who are ethnically Russian, particularly in Crimea and East Ukraine. But maybe some of them boycotted it. Likewise, in Georgia, about 98% of people voted for independence. That's because those who were against usually boycotted it, because it was a ridiculously high percentage. It seems illegitimate. So that was how it came to an end. There was a Belaversha Accords, where the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Socialist Federative Social Republic recognized that this had all happened. I know now they're trying to say that it's illegal or nonsense like that, or that Gorbachev was bribed or Yeltsin was bribed to do this, but that's an outrageous lie. So remember Christmas Day 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered for the last time at the Kremlin, and the Russian tricolor was hoisted. But remember the February 1992 Olympics, the Soviet team was there because there hadn't been time to organize 15 separate teams. So that's just a very brief précis about the breakup of the Soviet Union. Something that Putin bitterly rues, and he's trying to put it back together with very limited success. Even Belarus, the closest one to him, even there he has rather limited control. Toodaloo.